Lecture: Direct Presidential Action. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are going to examine an aspect of presidential power that is both fascinating and controversial: direct presidential action. When we think of the presidency, we often picture a leader proposing legislation to Congress or giving inspiring speeches to the American public. But there's another side to presidential power: actions taken without congressional approval, decisions that bypass the long drawn-out legislative process. These are moments when the president acts unilaterally, without waiting for the other branches of government to move. Why is this worth studying? Because direct presidential action sits at the very heart of a modern debate over how much power one person should have in a constitutional democracy. On one hand, it allows for swift responses in emergencies. On the other, it raises the specter of executive overreach. 1. The constitutional roots. The U.S. Constitution gives the president relatively limited formal unilateral powers. Article 2 grants the president the role of commander-in-chief, the authority to grant pardons, and the responsibility to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Beyond that, the president's direct action authority has evolved over time, not through explicit constitutional amendment, but through practice, precedent, and interpretation. Each president has, in effect, tested the limits, and in doing so has sometimes expanded them. Think of it like a rubber band. It starts small, but over time, each president stretches it just a little bit further. 2. The tools of direct presidential action. There are three main tools we'll focus on: executive orders, executive agreements, and presidential pardons. A. Executive orders. Executive orders are legally binding directives from the president to federal agencies. They carry the weight of law, but only within the executive branch. Congress does not vote on them. Historically, presidents have used executive orders to clarify how laws will be enforced or to direct the operations of the government. George Washington issued the very first executive order in 1789, instructing his department heads to submit reports to him. Fast forward to 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt used Executive Order 9066 to authorize the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. One of the most controversial uses of direct presidential power in U.S. history, executive orders can be powerful, but they are not permanent. Future presidents can revoke them, and courts can strike them down if they violate the Constitution. B. Executive agreements. The Constitution requires that treaties be approved by 2/3 of the Senate, but presidents have found a way to bypass that requirement: the executive agreement. These agreements with foreign governments have the force of treaties, but they don't require Senate ratification. For example, in 2015, President Barack Obama entered into the Iran nuclear deal largely through executive agreement. It allowed for swift diplomatic action, but sparked intense debate over whether it bypassed the constitutional role of Congress. While executive agreements are faster and more flexible than treaties, they are also more fragile. A new president can simply withdraw from them, as President Donald Trump did when he pulled the U.S. out of the Iran deal in 2018. See presidential pardons. The power to pardon is perhaps the most unilateral authority a president possesses. A pardon wipes away a federal criminal conviction as if it never happened. This power is absolute for federal offenses and does not require approval from Congress or the courts. Presidents have used pardons for both compassionate and controversial reasons. George Washington issued pardons to participants in the Whiskey Rebellion in 1795 as a gesture of national unity. Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon after the Watergate scandal, arguing that the nation needed to move forward. Donald Trump pardoned several political allies in the final days of his presidency, prompting accusations of cronyism. The pardon power can be a tool of mercy, but also a lightning rod for public criticism. 3. Why presidents act directly. Why might a president choose to act unilaterally rather than work through Congress? Speed. In moments of crisis, such as after the September 11th attacks, President George W. Bush issued orders to reorganize homeland security measures without waiting for lengthy legislative debate. Gridlock. When Congress is deeply divided, passing laws can become nearly impossible. Presidents may use executive orders to push policy forward despite partisan deadlock. Policy control. Executive action allows a president to shape how laws are implemented and enforced. In short, direct presidential action can cut through political stalemate, but it can also cut corners on democratic deliberation. 4. Risks and limitations. While direct action can be effective, it is not without limits. Judicial review. Courts can overturn executive actions if they exceed constitutional authority. For example, parts of President Truman's seizure of steel mills during the Korean War were struck down by the Supreme Court in Youngstown Sheet and Tube v. Sawyer, 1952. Political backlash. Acting unilaterally can alienate Congress, the public, or both, making future cooperation more difficult. Impermanence. Most executive actions can be undone by the next president. 5. Modern examples and controversies. Let's bring this into the present. Obama's DACA program. In 2012, President Obama used executive action to create the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, protecting certain undocumented immigrants from deportation. Critics argued it was an overreach. Supporters saw it as necessary in the face of congressional inaction. Trump's travel ban. Early in his presidency, Donald Trump issued an executive order restricting entry from several predominantly Muslim countries. It was immediately challenged in court, revised multiple times, and partially upheld by the Supreme Court. Biden's student loan forgiveness. President Joe Biden attempted to cancel a portion of federal student debt via executive authority. The Supreme Court ultimately blocked the plan, illustrating the judiciary's role as a check on presidential action. 6. The larger constitutional debate. This leads us to the central question. How much unilateral power should one person have in a constitutional republic? Some argue that strong direct action is necessary for effective leadership in a fast-paced, globalized world. Others warn that relying too heavily on executive authority undermines the separation of powers and invites authoritarianism. 7. Closing thoughts. Presidents will always face the temptation to act directly to bypass the messy, unpredictable process of legislation. Sometimes this is exactly what the country needs. At other times, it risks upsetting the delicate balance of power that the framers of the Constitution designed. As students of American government, our task is to critically examine not just the legality of these actions, but their long-term impact on democracy.